Some secrets aren't meant to stay hidden. They sit just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come alive, to shatter everything. Looking back, I wonder if I had ever truly known Jacob, or if I'd simply believed the image he presented, too afraid to see the truth behind the facade. I thought I'd found an escape in Nate Lawson, our town's young sheriff. A momentary thrill, a piece of life I could reclaim for myself. But in a way I hadn't foreseen, my choices set off a series of events I could never have controlled. Jacob wasn't just the husband I thought I knew. And now, with his quiet knowledge of every secret I thought I could keep, my life has become his weapon. I had lived in silence for so long that I'd nearly forgotten the sound of my own laughter. Jacob and I had been married for over 40 years, and while I couldn't deny the comfort we shared, the spark between us had faded into a quiet resignation. At 64, I had learned to find solace in the routine, in the small acts of familiarity that stitched our life together. But the yearning for something more never entirely faded. Then I met Sheriff Nate Lawson. It was a spring afternoon when I first encountered Nate. The sun was just beginning to cast warm rays over the sleepy town, coaxing life back into the streets after a long, harsh winter. I was on my way back from the market, arms laden with bags, when I managed to lock myself out of my car, my keys resting innocently on the passenger seat. I must have looked quite the sight, standing there, wrestling with my bags and muttering under my breath, when I heard a voice behind me. "Need a hand, ma'am?" I turned and found myself looking into the clear blue eyes of Sheriff Nate Lawson. Tall, with an easy smile and a hint of mischief in his eyes, he was the kind of young man who could turn heads with just a glance. But it wasn't just his looks that caught my attention, it was the kindness in his face, the way he seemed genuinely amused by my predicament. "Yes, actually," I managed, laughing, despite myself. "I can't believe I locked myself out." He chuckled, glancing at my car. "I'd be happy to help if you'll allow me." He had the door open in minutes, handing me my keys with a warm smile. "There you go, Mrs. Monroe, saved from an afternoon in the parking lot." "Thank you, Sheriff," I replied, feeling a blush rise to my cheeks. "I really appreciate it." "Please," he said, his grin widening, "call me Nate." It was a simple interaction, but as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of excitement it left in me, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was harmless, that there was no harm in admiring a kind young man from a distance. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted. Days turned into weeks, and each time I saw Nate around town, the thrill would return, a fleeting spark that brightened my otherwise predictable days. It didn't take long before our chance encounters began to feel more intentional, more like an escape I found myself seeking. It was an unassuming day when things began to change. The kind of day that gives no warning of what's to come, that lulls you into a sense of security just before everything shifts. I was in town, picking up a few things for a charity luncheon Jacob had asked me to organize, when I spotted Nate across the street. He was talking with one of the locals, his uniform crisp, his posture relaxed, and when he caught sight of me, his face lit up in a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Mrs. Monroe?" he greeted me, his tone warm. "Good to see you again." "Nate," I replied, smiling back. "It's Clara, just Clara." He nodded, his smile turning slightly mischievous. "All right, Clara, would you mind if I stole you away for a cup of coffee?" It was a simple invitation, one I could have easily declined, but the thrill of something new, something forbidden, was impossible to resist. "I'd like that," I heard myself say, my voice sounding unfamiliar, like a version of myself I'd long buried. We found ourselves at a small cafe, tucked away from the main road, the kind of place where you could be invisible if you wanted to be. We sat in a quiet corner, the sun casting a soft glow over the table as we talked. At first it was innocent enough, stories of the town, laughter over small mishaps, the casual banter of two people getting to know each other. But as the conversation deepened, I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. He listened with an attentiveness that made me feel seen, as if every word I said mattered. And in return, he shared pieces of his own life, fragments of dreams and regrets that mirrored my own. When our hands brushed across the table, I didn't pull away. And when he looked at me, his gaze lingering, I knew I was crossing a line I could never uncross. The rational part of me whispered that this was wrong, that I was risking everything. But in that moment, I didn't care. All I cared about was the feeling of being wanted, of being alive. Before I knew it, he had leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was brief, almost innocent, but it was enough to set my heart racing, to remind me of the thrill of desire. "I'm sorry," he whispered, pulling back slightly, his face filled with uncertainty. "I didn't mean to." But I shook my head, silencing his apology. "Don't be," I whispered back, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in years. I wanted this. We sat there for a long time, the weight of our actions settling between us, unspoken but understood. We both knew that this was more than just a fleeting attraction, that we had crossed into dangerous territory. But neither of us wanted to stop. And so, we didn't. Over the weeks that followed, our secret meetings became more frequent. We found quiet places to steal moments together, careful to avoid prying eyes to keep our affair hidden. The thrill of secrecy added an intensity to every touch, every whispered word, making each encounter feel like something forbidden and precious. Yet, as my connection with Nate deepened, my life with Jacob began to unravel in ways I couldn't ignore. Jacob was a man of routine, a creature of habit, and for years I had adapted to his schedule, his expectations. But now, I found myself slipping away, finding excuses to leave the house, to escape the confines of our predictable life. At first, Jacob didn't seem to notice the change. He was consumed with his work, spending late nights in his study, shrouded in the quiet secrecy that had always surrounded him. But as my absences grew more frequent, he began to ask questions, his tone laced with an uncharacteristic sharpness. "Out again?" he asked one evening as I slipped back into the house after meeting Nate. "You've been out quite a bit lately." I forced a smile, hoping to mask the tension in my voice. "Just running errands, Jacob. You know how it is with the charity events. There's always something to organize." He didn't respond, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of suspicion that sent a chill down my spine. But he said nothing more, returning to his work, as if the conversation had never happened. Over the days that followed, I became more cautious, more careful with every step I took. But even as I tried to maintain the facade, I could feel the weight of the lies beginning to press down on me, threatening to unravel everything I had built. Then one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I noticed a small black device resting on the side table. It was barely noticeable, no larger than a coin, its light blinking faintly. Panic surged through me as I realized what it was, a tracking device. Jacob had been monitoring me, tracing my movements with a precision that left me feeling exposed, vulnerable. My heart pounded as I stared at the device, the implications sinking in. Jacob wasn't just suspicious, he was watching me, tracking every step I took. The realization sent a chill down my spine, a silent warning that echoed through my mind. He knew, or he was close to knowing, and I was trapped in a web of my own making. I didn't know what to do, whom to turn to. Nate was the one person I could trust, but involving him would only put him in more danger. And as the days passed, Jacob's gaze grew sharper, his questions more pointed, each one tightening the noose around my carefully constructed lies. I was living in a house of cards, and I could feel it beginning to crumble, piece by piece. The discovery of the tracking device shifted something fundamental in my life. Every interaction with Jacob felt laden with tension, every moment a carefully constructed game that I was afraid to lose. I became hyper-aware of every gesture, every word exchanged between us, acutely conscious of the invisible noose tightening around my life. One evening, while preparing dinner, I found myself nervously glancing over my shoulder, expecting to find Jacob watching me. And just as I feared, there he was, standing in the doorway, his gaze unreadable. "Clara," his voice calm but laced with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to talk." The knife slipped from my hand, clattering onto the counter. I turned to face him, trying to mask my fear. "Of course, what is it?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I know where you've been going, Clara. I know about the sheriff." My heart raced and I felt my knees weaken. I struggled to keep my composure, but the weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating. "Jacob, he raised a hand, silencing me. "I'm not interested in excuses," he said, his tone cold. What I'm interested in is how far you thought you could go, sneaking around with a boy who has no idea who he's dealing with. A sense of dread settled over me, and I felt the ground slipping out from beneath my feet. Jacob, please, I whispered, my voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. Hurt me? He echoed, a bitter smile twisting his lips. You have no idea, Clara, who you've hurt, or who you're dealing with. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I'm not just the man you married, Clara. I have connections. People who understand loyalty, who value it above all else, and those who betray me, they pay the price. I felt a wave of nausea rise within me as I realized the implications of his words. Jacob wasn't just a man with power and influence. He was part of something far darker, something hidden beneath the respectable facade he wore so well. I had been living with a stranger, a man whose true nature had remained carefully concealed until now. Jacob, I stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. I didn't know. Didn't know? He interrupted, his voice icy. Then perhaps it's time you did. Without another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of photographs. He tossed them onto the kitchen counter, and I felt a surge of horror as I recognized the images. Nate and me, our secret moments, captured in brutal, unforgiving clarity. You see, Clara, he said, his voice dripping with contempt, I know everything, every lie, every moment you thought you'd hidden, and now I hold all the power. I felt a crushing weight settle over me, the full realization of my situation sinking in. Jacob wasn't just aware of my affair, he had been tracking it, documenting every detail with a precision that left no room for escape. I was trapped, bound to him by the evidence he now held over me. If you even think about running to him, he continued, his voice a dangerous whisper, I'll make sure everyone knows. I'll destroy his career, his reputation, everything he's built. And as for you, well, let's just say I'll ensure you'll have nothing left. I stood there, numb, as the reality of my situation settled over me. I was a prisoner, bound not by chains, but by the carefully constructed web of control Jacob had woven around my life. And there was no way out. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself living under Jacob's iron rule, every aspect of my life dictated by his unspoken threats. I was careful to avoid Nate, to stay away from the places where we had once met, but the ache of that separation lingered, a constant reminder of the freedom I had lost. Jacob was methodical in his approach, making sure that I understood the full extent of his control. He monitored my every move, each phone call, each errand, a reminder that I was always under his watchful eye. And though he never directly referenced his threats again, the tension between us was thick, an ever-present reminder that one wrong step could destroy everything. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I felt the crushing weight of my isolation. I had no one to turn to, no one who could understand the impossible situation I was trapped in. I wanted to reach out to Nate, to explain, to tell him everything, but I knew that doing so would only put him in danger. Jacob had made that abundantly clear. As I sat there lost in thought, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Nate. Clara, please talk to me. I know something's wrong. Just tell me what's going on. The word sent a jolt through me, and I felt a surge of desperation rise within me. Nate was the one person who could understand, who might be able to help me find a way out. But I knew that Jacob would find out, that he would follow through on his threats if he discovered my attempt to reach out. I stared at the message, my heart torn between fear and the desperate need for connection. But in the end, fear won out. I couldn't risk it, not with everything Jacob held over me. My hands shook as I typed a response, my heart breaking with every word. Nate, I'm sorry. We can't see each other anymore. Please understand. I hit send, feeling a hollow ache settle in my chest as I watched the message disappear. I had severed the one connection that had kept me grounded, the one person who had made me feel alive, and now I was truly alone. In the weeks that followed, my desperation grew. The weight of Jacob's control was suffocating, a constant reminder that I was trapped in a prison of my own making. I could feel myself unraveling, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of freedom. But every time I imagined a way out, Jacob's threats echoed in my mind, silencing any hope of escape. But as my desperation deepened, I began to see a glimmer of an idea, a risky, dangerous plan that might give me back my freedom. I knew that Jacob's power lay in his control, in the secrets he held over me. If I could find a way to take back that control, to gather evidence of his own secrets, I might be able to bargain for my freedom. It was a long shot, a dangerous gamble that could easily backfire. But it was my only hope. Over the next few days, I began to search for anything that could give me leverage, a trace of his hidden connections, a document that revealed his criminal ties. I combed through his office late at night, careful to leave no trace of my search, my heart pounding with each passing moment. And then one night, I found it. Hidden in a locked drawer, I discovered a series of documents. Financial records, correspondence, photographs, each one a piece of the puzzle that revealed Jacob's true identity. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man with ties to powerful, dangerous people, a web of criminal connections that spanned far beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt a surge of triumph as I gathered the evidence, my hands shaking with the realization that I finally had something to use against him. But as I stared at the documents, I felt a cold sense of dread settle over me. This wasn't just a game of secrets and lies. This was a dangerous, high-stakes gamble that could end with me losing everything. But I knew that I had no other choice. If I wanted my freedom, if I wanted to escape the prison Jacob had created, I would have to take the risk. I would have to confront him, to use the evidence I had gathered as my bargaining chip. And so, with my heart pounding, I prepared for the confrontation that would decide my fate. The next morning, I waited until Jacob had left the house before setting my plan into motion. I spent hours preparing, rehearsing the words I would say, gathering every piece of evidence I had found. I knew that I would only have one chance to confront him, to force him to give me back my freedom. When he returned that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room, the documents laid out on the table between us. He entered the room, his expression shifting from confusion to anger as he took in the scene. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice filled with barely controlled fury. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with a steely determination. "It's the truth, Jacob. The truth about who you are. I know about your connections, your dealings. And if you don't let me go, if you don't release me from this prison you've created, I'll make sure everyone else knows too." His face twisted into a mask of rage, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you can threaten me, Clara? After everything you've done?" I held my ground, refusing to let him intimidate me. "Yes, Jacob, because this isn't just about me. It's about the life you've forced me to live. The lies, the control. I'm done being your prisoner." For a moment he stared at me, his gaze filled with a mix of anger and something else, something that looked almost like respect. And then, slowly, he nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "You want your freedom? You can have it. But don't expect me to forget this, Clara. Because I won't." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the living room, my heart pounding as I realized that I had finally won. I was free. But the cost of that freedom, the price I had paid, would haunt me for the rest of my life. After that evening, Jacob kept his word. He allowed me the freedom to live my life, but the cost of that freedom weighed heavily. While he had agreed to release me from his grip, his gaze was colder than ever. A silent reminder that he would never truly forget the betrayal. I moved out of the house within days, taking only a few belongings and settling into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the home I'd shared with Jacob, but it felt like a refuge. A place where I could finally breathe without feeling his presence around every corner. But with freedom came a harsh reality. I had lost everything: my home, my life with Jacob, my connection to Nate. The affair that had once filled me with excitement had faded into a painful memory, a reminder of the risks I'd taken, the lives I had disrupted. I found myself alone in a strange, unfamiliar world, left to grapple with the consequences of my actions. Nate tried to reach out to me a few times, but I ignored his calls, his messages. I couldn't bear the thought of dragging him back into the mess I had created. He was better off without me, free from the weight of the secrets and lies that had woven their way into my life. One evening, as I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the emptiness settled over me like a blanket. The silence was thick, oppressive, filled with the echoes of choices I could never undo. I had risked everything for a fleeting thrill, a brief escape from the confines of my marriage, and now I was left to pick up the pieces alone. The regret was a constant companion, a shadow that lingered with every step I took. I had traded stability for excitement, security for the thrill of something forbidden, and in the end, I had lost more than I could have ever imagined. Months passed, each day a slow, painful process of rebuilding my life. I tried to make peace with the choices I had made, to find solace in the quiet moments, but the weight of my actions never fully faded. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was Jacob. His voice was calm, almost formal, as he requested to meet me for coffee. I hesitated, unsure of what he could possibly want, but curiosity won out, and I agreed. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a neutral ground where neither of us held any sway. Jacob arrived promptly, his demeanor as composed as ever, though there was a hint of something I hadn't seen before, a wariness, a vulnerability that seemed out of place. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his voice measured. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions as I faced him. I wasn't sure what to expect. He took a deep breath, glancing down at his coffee before meeting my gaze. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left. About us, about everything that happened." His words hung in the air, and I waited, unsure of what he was trying to say. "I didn't handle things well, Clara," he continued, his voice tinged with regret. "I let my anger, my pride, get the best of me. And while I'll never excuse what you did, I realize that I played a part in it too." His admission surprised me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of understanding, a glimpse of the man I had once loved. "Jacob, I'm sorry," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I'm sorry for everything." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know, and I'm sorry too." For a long moment, we sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. There was no going back, no undoing the damage we had done, but in that moment, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet peace that had eluded me for so long. As we parted ways, I knew that this was truly the end of our story. We had hurt each other, betrayed each other, but perhaps, in some small way, we had found a measure of forgiveness too. Life after Jacob was a strange, fragile thing. I had spent so many years defined by my role as his wife, by the routines we had built together, that the absence of it all left me adrift. I moved through my days like a ghost, learning to navigate a world that felt both liberating and terrifying. I took up small hobbies to fill the emptiness, spending hours at the library, volunteering at local events, finding purpose in the quiet corners of life. Slowly I began to rebuild, to find pieces of myself that I had long buried beneath the weight of my marriage. But even as I moved forward, memories of Nate lingered, haunting the spaces between my thoughts. I found myself wondering what might have happened if I had chosen differently, if I had fought harder to keep him in my life. But regret was a bitter pill, and I knew that some things were better left in the past. One afternoon, while browsing the library shelves, I came across a book on forgiveness, on the process of letting go. I spent hours reading, devouring each page, hoping to find some measure of peace within its words. The author spoke of self-forgiveness, of accepting one's past mistakes without judgment. It was a concept I struggled with, but as I read, I felt a weight begin to lift, a small glimmer of hope that maybe, one day, I could forgive myself too. And as I left the library that day, I felt a sense of clarity, a renewed determination to let go of the guilt that had haunted me for so long. I couldn't change the past, couldn't erase the choices I had made, but I could choose to move forward, to find meaning in the life that lay ahead. Years passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm, a gentle pace that brought me a sense of peace I had never known. I found joy in the simple things: the warmth of the sun on my skin, the laughter of children in the park, the small acts of kindness that filled each day. Jacob and I never spoke again after that final meeting, but I heard through mutual friends that he had moved on, finding companionship in his own way. Nate, too, had moved forward, building a life that I could only hope was filled with happiness. As for me, I had learned to live with the scars, to accept them as a part of my story. The affair, the betrayal, the control Jacob had wielded over me. It had all shaped me, molded me into a version of myself that was stronger, more resilient. And as I stood in my small garden one evening watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of gratitude, a quiet peace that I had fought so hard to find. Life had not turned out as I had planned, but it had brought me to this moment, to this place of understanding. Some choices cannot be undone, and some scars never fully fade. But in the end, we are shaped by the lives we live, by the lessons we learn, and by the resilience that carries us forward. And as I looked out at the world before me, I knew that I was finally free. It started with an ordinary inconvenience, a delayed flight, a missed connection, and a couple of days stuck in a hotel far from home. But what unfolded between me and Mason during those 2 days was anything but ordinary. It was the kind of connection that altered the fabric of your life, the kind that whispered to you that boundaries and roles were meant to be crossed. I hadn't meant for it to happen. I'd spent years perfecting the role of the devoted wife, the supportive stepmother, the woman who always knew her place. But life has a funny way of unraveling in the most unexpected places. An airport bar, a quiet bench overlooking the city skyline, a hotel room far away from anyone who might pass judgment. What Mason and I shared during those hours was electric, forbidden, and utterly transformative. But what came after, what we uncovered, was more dangerous than either of us could have imagined. I'd been sitting in the airport lounge for hours, staring at the blinking departure screen that never seemed to change. The storm outside had grounded nearly every flight, and the air buzzed with the restless energy of stranded travelers. My husband, Victor, had called only once to check in. "Just wait it out, Claire," he'd said in his usual brusque tone. "You'll get home eventually." Victor didn't ask how I was doing, or if I needed anything. He rarely did anymore. For the last decade, our marriage had been more of a partnership of convenience than a romantic union. He worked long hours as an investment banker, and I filled my time with interior design projects, charity events, and the occasional dinner party. We existed in parallel, connected only by shared obligations. Mason, Victor's son from his first marriage, was seated across from me, engrossed in his laptop. He'd inherited his father's sharp jawline and intense work ethic, but where Victor was distant and calculating, Mason had a warmth that I'd always found intriguing. We weren't particularly close. Our relationship was cordial but formal, defined more by the roles we played than genuine connection. "Any updates?" Mason asked, glancing up at me. "Still nothing," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "Looks like we're stuck for a while." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "Guess we'd better make the best of it." When the announcement finally came through that our flight was canceled, we were shuffled to a nearby hotel along with dozens of other frustrated passengers. It was a sleek, modern place in the heart of the city. The kind of hotel designed for business travelers who valued efficiency over charm. Mason and I checked in at the same time, exchanging tired glances as we were handed our key cards. "I'm going to grab a drink," he said as we stepped into the elevator. "Want to join me?" I hesitated. Under normal circumstances, I would have declined. There was something about spending time alone with Mason that felt complicated. But the thought of sitting in my room, staring at the sterile walls, was unbearable. "Sure," I said finally. "Why not?" The rooftop bar was dimly lit, with panoramic windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the lights outside shimmered against the wet pavement below. Mason ordered an old-fashioned, and I settled for a glass of white wine, grateful for the familiar comfort of alcohol to take the edge off my unease. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. Mason told me about his startup, a tech company focused on sustainability, and the challenges of running a business in his 20s. I shared stories from my career in interior design, surprised by how genuinely interested he seemed in the details. "You're more creative than I realized," he said at one point, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I guess I always thought of you as, well, just Dad's wife." I laughed, though the comment stung slightly. "Well, I suppose that's fair. I've never been great at showing people who I really am." "That's a shame," he said, his gaze lingering on me. "There's a lot more to you than meets the eye." His words hung between us, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that someone had noticed the parts of me I'd long buried beneath the roles of wife and stepmother. I sipped my wine, letting the warmth of it soften the edges of my unease. "You're full of surprises yourself," I said, hoping to shift the attention back to him. "I didn't know you were so passionate about sustainability. Victor never mentioned it." Mason's smile turned wry. "Dad and I don't exactly see eye to eye on a lot of things. He thinks what I'm doing is a waste of time, that I should be working for a real company." His words, not mine. "That sounds like him," I admitted. "Victor's always been practical to a fault." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," Mason said with a chuckle. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the hum of quiet conversation and the soft clink of glasses filling the air around us. The view from the rooftop was stunning, the city a tapestry of glowing lights against the rain-slicked streets. "You know," Mason said, breaking the silence, "it's kind of nice being stuck here with you." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his honesty. "Oh? Why's that?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window as if searching for the right words. "I guess I've never really had the chance to get to know you. Not like this. You're different than I thought." "Different how?" I asked, my voice softer now. He met my eyes, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. "I think I'll keep that to myself for now." The tension in the air was subtle but undeniable, and I felt my pulse quicken as his words lingered in my mind. It was just the two of us here, far from the watchful eyes of family or society, and the boundaries that usually kept us in our respective roles felt more porous than ever. The following day, the rain continued, and the airline gave no indication of when flights might resume. Mason suggested we explore the city to pass the time, and though I hesitated at first, I couldn't deny the appeal of venturing out with him. We wandered through cobblestone streets, ducking into art galleries and small cafes, the kind of places I rarely visited with Victor. At one point, we stumbled upon a quiet park tucked between towering buildings, its paths lined with rain-soaked benches and blooming flowers. "This feels like a little secret," I said, sitting down on one of the benches beneath an overhang. Mason joined me, his coat damp from the drizzle. "I like finding places like this," he said. "They make the chaos of the city feel manageable." I smiled, watching as he tilted his head back to gaze at the sky. The rain had slowed to a light mist, the air cool and fresh. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, as though I could breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on me. "Do you ever feel like you've lost yourself?" I asked suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Mason turned to me, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you ever feel like you've become someone else? Someone you don't even recognize, just to fit into a role?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think we all do in a way. But it's up to us to figure out how to get back to who we really are." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "I'm not sure I even know who I am anymore," I admitted. Mason reached out, his hand brushing mine in a gesture that felt both comforting and electric. "Maybe this trip is a chance to figure that out," he said. Later that evening, back at the hotel, we found ourselves at the rooftop bar again. The city lights sparkled below, and the hum of quiet conversation created a cocoon of intimacy around us. "You've got this way of seeing the world," Mason said, his voice low. "It's refreshing. I don't think I've ever told you that." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "Thank you," I said softly. We stayed there for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly as the barriers between us dissolved. By the time we returned to our rooms, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease, as though I were standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite name. The next morning, the city was shrouded in mist, the rain casting a dreamy haze over the streets. Mason suggested a walk to a nearby viewpoint, a hill overlooking the city that promised breathtaking views despite the weather. We walked side by side in comfortable silence, the soft patter of rain creating a rhythm to our steps. When we reached the top, the sight before us took my breath away. The city stretched out like a living mosaic, the rain lending it a surreal, shimmering quality. "This is incredible," I whispered, my voice almost lost in the quiet. Mason stood beside me, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes I think moments like this are what life's all about, just being here, now. I turned to him, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. There was something in his gaze, a depth of emotion that I hadn't noticed before. Thank you, I said softly. For what? For being here, for seeing me. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made my heart ache in the best way. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand brushing against his. The touch was fleeting, but it set something in motion, a spark that neither of us could ignore. We stood there, the rain falling softly around us, the city a silent witness to the moment that changed everything. The rain had started again by the time we left the viewpoint, a steady drizzle that painted the city in shades of silver and gray. Mason offered me his jacket, but I shook my head, enjoying the cool drops on my skin. It felt like a cleansing, as if the rain could wash away the weight of everything I'd been carrying. You're quiet, Mason said as we descended the hill, his voice cutting through the rhythm of our steps. I glanced at him, my thoughts still tangled in the moment we'd shared at the top. Just thinking. About how strange this all is, I admitted. Being here, with you. It feels different. He raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Different good or different bad? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Different good, I think. It's been a long time since I've felt this light. He nodded, his expression softening. I get that. Sometimes life feels so heavy, but then something or someone comes along and reminds you what it's like to just be. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a warmth rise in my chest. We walked in silence for a while, with the city unfolding around us as the rain eased into a soft mist. Back at the hotel, I found myself reluctant to part ways with Mason. He seemed to sense it, pausing outside my door as if waiting for me to say something. Do you want to grab a drink or something? He asked finally, his tone casual but his eyes searching mine. I hesitated, torn between the voice in my head urging me to keep my distance and the pull I felt toward him, a magnetic force I couldn't explain. Sure, I said, surprising even myself. Just give me a few minutes to freshen up. When we met again in the lobby, the atmosphere between us had shifted. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet awareness that neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. We wandered through the hotel, eventually finding a quiet lounge tucked away on one of the upper floors. It was nearly empty, the dim lighting and soft jazz music creating an intimate cocoon around us. Mason ordered a whiskey, and I opted for another glass of wine, the familiar comfort of it helping to steady my nerves. This feels like one of those moments you don't forget, Mason said after a while, his voice low. What do you mean? I asked, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. I mean, this, sitting here with you. It feels important somehow. I smiled, though my heart was racing. You have a way of making everything sound profound, you know that? He chuckled, his gaze never leaving mine. Maybe, or maybe it's just you. The weight of his words settled between us, and I felt the air shift, the tension growing as the seconds ticked by. I looked away, focusing on the flickering candle in the center of the table, but I could still feel his eyes on me, warm and steady. Mason, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. This, whatever this is, it's dangerous. Maybe, he admitted, but sometimes the best things in life are. I met his gaze, and for a moment, I saw something there that made my breath catch, a mix of vulnerability and desire that mirrored my own. It was a look that spoke of unspoken truths and uncharted territory, and it left me feeling both exhilarated and terrified. I should probably go, I said, rising from my seat. He stood as well, his movements slow and deliberate. I'll walk you back. The walk to my room was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mess of emotions I couldn't untangle. When we reached my door, I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. Good night, I said softly, my hand resting on the door handle. Good night, Claire, he replied, his voice gentle. For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. Then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. It was meant to be innocent, a simple gesture of gratitude for his kindness. But as I pulled back, my lips brushed against his, and the spark I'd been trying to ignore ignited into something I couldn't contain. He froze for a moment, as if unsure of what to do, and I felt a rush of panic. But then his hand came up to cup my face, his touch warm and steady, and I knew there was no turning back. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though we were both testing the waters. But as the seconds passed, it deepened, a fire building between us that left me breathless. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself surrendering to the moment, to the emotions I'd kept bottled up for so long. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the quiet hallway. "Claire," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," I whispered, my heart racing. "This can't happen. It's wrong." "But it feels right," he said, his eyes searching mine. I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that the walls I'd built around myself were crumbling, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the kiss in my mind. The guilt was there, sharp and unrelenting, but so was the memory of his touch, the way he'd looked at me as though I were the only person in the world. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that couldn't be repeated. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. The next morning, Mason was waiting for me in the lobby, his expression unreadable. When he saw me, he offered a small smile, his eyes warm and understanding. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "Morning," I replied, my heart skipping a beat. We didn't talk about the night before, but the tension between us was palpable. It was as though an invisible thread connected us, pulling us closer even as I tried to maintain my distance. As the day wore on, I found myself drawn to him, unable to resist the pull of his presence. And by the time the sun began to set, I knew that whatever boundaries we'd crossed, there was no going back. The rain had returned by the time we sat down for dinner that evening, a steady patter against the hotel's tall windows. The dining room was quiet, most of the other travelers having retreated to their rooms after another day of uncertainty. Mason and I sat near the corner, our table illuminated by a single flickering candle. The air between us felt different now, charged, almost fragile. I caught him glancing at me several times, and each time I looked away, unsure of what I'd see in his eyes. "You've been quiet today," he said finally, breaking the silence. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "Just thinking." "About last night?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "It was a mistake, Mason. We both know that." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze steady. "Was it, though? Because it didn't feel like one to me." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's not that simple. You're my stepson. Whatever this is, it's wrong." "Maybe," he admitted, "but does it feel wrong to you?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, it didn't feel wrong, not in the way it should have. It felt complicated, yes, dangerous, absolutely, but it also felt real, like the most honest thing I'd experienced in years. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Claire, I need to know. Is this just me, or do you feel it too?" I looked at him, my defenses crumbling under the weight of his gaze. "I feel it," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean it's right." "Sometimes the right thing isn't the thing that makes sense," he said softly. "Sometimes it's just what you need." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a world where it could be that simple. A world where I didn't have to worry about Victor or what society would think, where I could follow my heart without fear of the consequences. But that wasn't the world we lived in, and I knew it. "We can't do this, Mason," I said finally, pulling my hand away. "It's too much." He leaned back, his expression tinged with disappointment but not surprise. "I get it," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change how I feel about you." I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I'd given him hope only to take it away. "Mason, you're a wonderful man, kind, intelligent, passionate. But it's not just about us. There are other people involved, people who could get hurt." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know, but that doesn't make it any easier to walk away." Later that evening, I found myself wandering the hotel's halls, unable to sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, longing, fear. I kept replaying our conversation, his words echoing in my head like a melody I couldn't forget. Eventually, I ended up in the lounge, hoping a change of scenery would quiet my thoughts. I wasn't expecting to find Mason there, sitting alone in one of the leather armchairs by the window. He looked up as I entered, his expression softening when he saw me. Couldn't sleep either? I shook my head, taking the seat across from him. My mind won't stop racing. Same here, he admitted, leaning back in his chair. We sat in silence for a while, the rain streaking the windows like liquid silver. Despite everything, his presence was comforting, grounding me in a way I couldn't explain. I feel like I've been living someone else's life, I said suddenly, surprising even myself. He turned to me, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean my marriage, my career, everything. It's like I've been playing a role for so long, I don't even know who I am anymore. Mason nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I think a lot of people feel that way, but it takes courage to admit it, to even recognize it. I sighed, looking down at my hands. I don't know if it's courage or just exhaustion. I've spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother, the perfect everything. And now I feel like I don't even know what I want. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. What do you want, Claire? If you could have anything, anything at all, what would it be? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. What did I want? It was a question I'd stopped asking myself years ago, too consumed by the demands of my life to even consider the possibility of something more. I want to feel alive again, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Mason reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. You deserve that, he said softly. You deserve to be happy. His words brought tears to my eyes, and I looked away, afraid of what he might see in my expression. But deep down, I knew he was right. I did deserve to be happy. I just didn't know how to get there. We talked for hours that night, sharing pieces of ourselves we'd never shared with anyone else. Mason told me about his struggles with his father, the pressure he felt to live up to Victor's impossible standards. I told him about the loneliness that had crept into my marriage, the way Victor's indifference had made me feel invisible. By the time the sun began to rise, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as though our conversation had peeled back layers I hadn't even realized were there. Mason, I said softly, my voice tinged with both gratitude and sadness. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, I replied, tears welling in my eyes, for reminding me what it feels like to be noticed. He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that made my heart ache. You deserve that, Claire. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. As I stood to leave, he reached for my hand one last time, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. And in that touch, I felt a promise, a quiet understanding that, no matter what happened next, we had given each other something that couldn't be undone. The hours after our conversation in the lounge passed in a haze. I spent the morning wandering through the hotel, my thoughts racing with everything Mason had said. His words lingered in my mind, intertwining with my own doubts and desires, creating a storm I couldn't seem to quiet. By mid-afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the city bathed in soft, golden light. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would help me find some clarity. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message from Mason. Meet me on the terrace. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every rational part of me screamed that I should ignore him, that I should let this moment pass before it became something I couldn't undo. But the pull I felt toward him was too strong, a magnetic force I couldn't resist. On my way, I replied, my heart pounding as I stepped out of the elevator and made my way to the rooftop terrace. The terrace was quiet when I arrived, the tables and chairs still damp from the rain. Mason was leaning against the railing, his back to me, his gaze fixed on the skyline. The setting sun cast a warm glow over his profile, and for a moment I paused, unsure of what to say. He turned as I approached, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Hey. Hey, I replied, my voice softer than I intended. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he gestured toward a nearby bench. Sit with me? I nodded, following him to the bench and sitting down beside him. The view from the terrace was breathtaking, the city stretching out before us in a kaleidoscope of colors. This is beautiful, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It is, he agreed, his gaze fixed on me instead of the skyline. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, and I looked away, focusing on the horizon. What are we doing, Mason? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. I don't know. All I know is that being here with you feels right, like I finally found something I didn't know I was looking for. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I turned to him, my heart racing. This can't happen, I said softly, though the conviction in my voice was fading. But it already is, he replied, his gaze steady. The honesty in his words left me breathless, and I felt my defenses crumbling under the weight of everything we'd shared. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him we needed to stop, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. Claire, he said, his voice tinged with both vulnerability and determination. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for right now. I stared at him, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and longing. Part of me wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of my room and pretend this moment had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had been starved for connection, for passion, couldn't walk away. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice trembling. You don't have to know, he said softly. Just let it happen. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time we made our way back inside, the city lights twinkling like stars against the darkened sky. Mason walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back, a gesture that felt both comforting and possessive. When we reached his room, he paused at the door, his gaze searching mine. Are you sure? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment, the line we couldn't uncross. But as I looked at him, at the quiet vulnerability in his expression, I felt my resolve slip away. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He opened the door, and I stepped inside, my breath catching as the reality of what we were about to do sank in. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, creating a cocoon of privacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Then slowly, Mason reached for me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. You can tell me to stop, he said, his voice low and steady. I won't, I replied, my voice firm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. What happened next was a blur of sensations, a mix of hesitation and urgency that left me breathless. Mason was both gentle and passionate, his touch igniting a fire I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself go, surrendering to the moment and everything it represented. When it was over, we lay in silence, our breathing the only sound in the room. Mason's arm was draped over me, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled web of guilt, exhilaration, and something I couldn't quite name. Are you okay? He asked softly, his voice pulling me from my reverie. I don't know, I admitted, turning to face him. I feel different. He nodded, his gaze steady. So do I. I searched his face, looking for some sign of regret, but all I saw was quiet determination. What happens now? He sighed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. The next morning, the world felt both the same and completely different. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, and the air was crisp and cool. Mason and I shared breakfast in the hotel dining room, our conversation light and easy despite the undercurrent of tension that lingered between us. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before, about the choices we'd made and what they meant for our lives moving forward. Part of me wanted to push it all aside, to pretend it had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had felt alive in his arms, knew that wasn't possible. As we prepared to leave the hotel and return to our normal lives, Mason pulled me aside, his expression serious. Claire, he said, his voice low. No matter what happens, I don't regret a single moment. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. Neither do I. And as we stepped out into the city, the sun shining down on us, I knew that everything had changed. Returning home felt like stepping back into a familiar prison. The walls of the house, once a place of comfort and routine, now felt suffocating. Victor was there, of course, calm, polished, and oblivious as ever. He greeted me with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, barely glancing up from his laptop as I set my bags down. Good trip? he asked, his tone disinterested. It was fine, I replied, my voice neutral. I glanced at Mason, who had walked in behind me, his expression carefully blank. It was strange seeing him here again, back in the roles we'd played for so long. Me as the dutiful wife, him as the reserved stepson. But beneath the surface, everything had changed, and we both knew it. Victor didn't seem to notice the tension, too absorbed in whatever business deal was lighting up his phone. But that night, as I lay in bed beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few days, Mason and I avoided being alone together, an unspoken agreement to keep our distance while we figured out how to navigate this new reality. But despite the space between us, I could feel his presence like a constant hum in the background, a reminder of the connection we shared. One evening, as Victor worked late in his study, Mason cornered me in the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I glanced toward the hallway, ensuring we were alone. "Not here," I whispered. "Let's go outside." We stepped onto the patio, the cool night air wrapping around us like a cloak. Mason leaned against the railing, his expression serious. "Something's not right," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "I overheard Dad on the phone earlier. He was talking about some offshore accounts and moving money around. It didn't sound legal." My stomach twisted. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I've been suspicious for a while now. His business deals never add up, and there's always this secrecy about them. But what I heard tonight confirms it. He's hiding something, Claire. Something big." I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Victor had always been guarded about his work, brushing off my questions with vague answers or dismissive comments. I'd assumed it was just his way, part of the distant, calculating man I'd married. But now, with Mason's words hanging between us, I realized there was more to it than I'd wanted to see. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mason hesitated, his jaw tightening. "We figure out what he's hiding. If it's as bad as I think it is, we need to protect ourselves." The next day, while Victor was out, Mason and I began searching the house for clues. It felt surreal, rummaging through drawers and filing cabinets in the home I'd shared with him for over a decade. But as we uncovered more documents, cryptic emails, bank statements with untraceable transfers, and a list of offshore account numbers, the truth became impossible to ignore. Victor wasn't just bending the rules, he was breaking them. "This is bad," Mason said, his brow furrowed as he studied one of the documents. "If this gets out, he could go to prison. And if we're tied to it..." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "We need to get out of this, Mason. We can't let him drag us down with him." He nodded, his gaze sharp. "Agreed. But we need more proof, something solid we can use if this blows up." That evening, Victor seemed oblivious to our growing unease. He poured himself a glass of scotch, settling into his favorite armchair with the confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. But I couldn't look at him the same way. The man I'd shared my life with, the man I'd once trusted, now felt like a stranger, a dangerous one. "Claire," he said suddenly, his gaze flicking toward me. "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right?" I forced a smile, masking the storm inside me. "Just tired," I replied. "The trip took more out of me than I thought." He nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, and returned his attention to his drink. But as I watched him, a flicker of resolve began to grow within me. Mason and I continued digging, piecing together the web of Victor's dealings. The more we uncovered, the darker it became. There were links to shell companies, payments to unknown entities, and hints of partnerships with people whose names sent a chill down my spine. One name, in particular, stood out. Dominic Vega. "Who is he?" I asked, staring at the name scrawled across one of the documents. Mason's expression darkened. "He's bad news. Dad mentioned him once, years ago. He's some kind of fixer, a guy who makes problems disappear. If Dad's working with him, it means whatever he's involved in is serious." A sense of dread settled over me. This wasn't just about money or tax evasion. This was something much bigger, something that could put us all in danger. A week later, the tension reached a breaking point. Victor confronted Mason in the study, his voice low but laced with anger. I stood just outside the door, my heart racing as I strained to hear their conversation. "You've been asking too many questions," Victor said, his tone cold. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. Now." "I'm just trying to understand," Mason replied, his voice steady but defiant. "You've been keeping secrets, Dad. Big ones. And I think it's time you came clean." There was a long pause, and when Victor spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Stay out of it, Mason. That's not a warning, it's a promise." I felt a chill run down my spine as I hurried away, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd heard. Victor wasn't just hiding something. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect it. That night, Mason and I met in the guest house at the edge of the property, a place we knew Victor rarely visited. We sat side by side on the worn couch, the weight of our discoveries pressing down on us. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We need to get out. Both of us. But we can't just leave. We need to make sure we're safe." I nodded, my mind racing. "We need leverage, something we can use to protect ourselves if Victor comes after us." Mason's gaze was steady. "Then we keep digging, but we need to be careful. If he finds out what we're doing..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Victor wasn't just a husband or a father. He was a man with dangerous connections, and we were playing a game we weren't sure we could win. As the days passed, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every conversation with Victor felt like a test, every glance a potential threat. Mason and I worked quietly, piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle, knowing that time was running out. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down. The house was eerily quiet the night it all came to a head. Victor had been unusually tense all day, his sharp commands and clipped tones setting everyone on edge. Mason stayed in his room for most of the afternoon, but I could feel the storm brewing. It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. That evening, Victor called me into his study. The door was slightly ajar when I approached, and I hesitated before stepping inside. He was sitting at his desk, his laptop glowing in the dim light, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Close the door," he said without looking up. I obeyed, the weight of the room pressing down on me as I moved to stand in front of his desk. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I don't know what you mean." He set the glass down with deliberate care, the sound sharp in the silence. "Don't play games with me, Claire. I'm not in the mood." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to maintain my composure. "Victor, I don't know what you're talking about." He leaned forward, his expression darkening. "I'm talking about you and Mason sneaking around this house like thieves, about the documents you've been going through, about the fact that you've been lying to my face." Panic surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "You're being paranoid." His laugh was cold, humorless. "Am I? Then explain this." He turned the laptop toward me, and my blood ran cold as I saw the images on the screen. Surveillance footage, Mason and me in the guest house, poring over the documents we'd found. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Nothing to say?" Victor asked, his tone mocking. I didn't think so. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized the extent of his control. He'd been watching us, tracking our every move, waiting for the moment to strike. "Victor?" I began, my voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," he snapped, rising from his chair. "You and Mason conspiring against me, digging into things you don't understand." I took a step back as he approached, his presence looming. "We were just trying to understand, Victor. You've been hiding things that could ruin all of us." He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "What exactly do you think you've uncovered?" "Offshore accounts," I said, summoning all the courage I could. "Shell companies, payments to people like Dominic Vega. Victor, you're involved in things that could destroy everything." His expression shifted, a flicker of something dangerous passing over his face. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this information?" I hesitated, and that was all the answer he needed. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you can threaten me? Use this against me? Let me make something very clear, Claire. I've built this life, this empire, and I won't let anyone, not even you, take it away from me." The fear in his voice was palpable. But so was the rage. I realized then that Victor wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was desperate. Before I could respond, the door to the study burst open, and Mason stepped inside, his face flushed with anger. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice steady but fierce. Victor turned, his expression shifting to one of disbelief. "You're defending her now? After everything?" "Yes," Mason replied, moving to stand beside me, "because she's the only one in this house who hasn't completely lost her soul." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Mason. You're just a naive kid playing at being a hero." "Maybe," Mason said, "but I know enough to see what you've become, and I won't let you hurt her, or me." The room crackled with tension as father and son faced off, the weight of years of resentment and betrayal coming to a head. I felt the air grow thick, suffocating, as Victor's anger boiled over. "You want to protect her?" Victor snarled, his voice rising. "Fine, but let me tell you something, Mason. This isn't a game. This is my life, our life, and you don't get to destroy it because you don't like how I play." "Your life," Mason said, his tone sharp. "That's all it's ever been about, hasn't it? You and your empire and your ego. You don't care about anyone else, not me, not Claire, just yourself." Victor's hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, I thought he might strike Mason. But then he stepped back, his expression shifting to something colder, more calculating. "You think you're so clever," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "but you have no idea what you're getting yourselves into. You don't know the people I'm dealing with. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it." He turned to me, his gaze hard. "And you, Claire? You think you can betray me and walk away unscathed? Think again." I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in. Victor wasn't bluffing. He was a man who had spent his life building power, and he wouldn't let it slip away without a fight. "You should both leave," he said finally, his tone icy. "Pack your things and get out of my house. But don't think for a second that this is over." Mason and I retreated to the guest house that night, our hearts heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. We packed quickly, knowing we couldn't stay under Victor's roof any longer. As we loaded our bags into Mason's car, I felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear for what Victor might do next, and relief that we were finally leaving. As we drove away, the house fading into the distance, Mason reached over and took my hand. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. "Together." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and doubt. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. A belief that, no matter what happened, we would face it together.